Hello and welcome to a brand new video. Throughout the history of philosophy, theologians and philosophers from Anselm to Al-Ghazali have tried to prove the existence of God through different arguments, and the most famous of which are the ontological arguments and the cosmological arguments. However, these arguments have also faced scrutiny throughout the years, and in this video, we'll go over the Enlightenment thinker Immanuel Kant's objection and critiques of these arguments and possible rebuttals to him as well. Having a background on Kant's own philosophy, also known as transcendental idealism, is crucial for understanding his objections. I'll try to make it easy to understand without getting too technical, as it's one of the most complex philosophical systems. An analogy for his system is like a projector. The mind is a projector, and the information that comes into the projector, perhaps a file, is the noumena, or the inaccessible reality. It gives information about what is to be projected. It projects onto the screen of experience. One can know something a priori, or without experience, or through logic about the thing that's being projected by having knowledge about the projector. For example, if we know that the projector is only black and white, then we know a priori that the projection will be black and white. Knowing information about the projector and the things on the screen, then what can one say about the file itself? There's no guarantee that the file obeys the laws of the projector. For example, if the projector is black and white as mentioned previously, that doesn't mean the file is black and white or has any color at all. It could be ones and zeros. There's no guarantee that what is being projected is similar to the actual file. Therefore, for Kant, our knowledge is limited to the projection, the phenomenon, or the world as it appears to us, and is structured by the categories of our minds. We cannot step outside the projector to access the file itself, which is the noumenal reality. And I have a video going into way more depth about Kantian philosophy if you're interested. So starting off with the ontological argument, Anselm's argument is a priori, meaning it tries to solve God's existence through reason alone, without looking at the world. So the premise is that God is that which there's nothing greater than can be conceived. So he's the most perfect being. So if God only exists as an idea in our mind, but not in reality, then we can imagine a greater being, or that is one that exists in reality. So the conclusion is that, therefore God must exist in reality, because a being that exists is greater than the one that only exists in the mind. According to Kant, this argumentation is flawed. He claimed that existence is not a predicate or an attribute, and a predicate is basically a quality or characteristic of a thing, such as being tall or red or smart. And Anselm treated existence as a predicate. So when he says God exists, God has existence as a property. However, existence isn't a property you can add. It doesn't add anything to the concept of God. So saying that God exists doesn't give you any new information about God. It's just the concept is instantiated in reality. So therefore, the ontological argument, according to Kant, tries to go directly from a mental concept of God is perfect to actual existence without proper justification. His refutation for the cosmological arguments, on the other hand, are a lot more complicated. The cosmological arguments for God's existence are a posteriori, meaning it tries to prove God's existence based on experience of the world. So the premise is that contingent things exist, or the things that are contingent are things that could fail to exist. So examples with that would be like you or me or the trees or the stars. They didn't have to exist and they could exist differently. And the observation is that contingent things cannot cause themselves. They could depend on something else for their existence. And based off that, an infinite chain of contingent causes doesn't explain ultimate existence in classical versions of this argument. So therefore, a necessary being, or a being that exists by itself and not dependent on anything else and has to exist, is the origin of all contingent things, and this necessary being is what we call God. Or you may have heard of the Kalam cosmological argument, which is espoused by Al-Ghazali, and in our modern times, Dr. William Lane Craig, and it states that premise 1, anything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, and conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. And then from further argumentation, you can derive that this necessary being is God. So Immanuel Kant believes that the cosmological argument collapses into the ontological argument. When the cosmological argument concludes that there must be a necessary being, i.e. God, it assumes that this necessary being is identical with the concept of God, but now we're back to a priori reasoning. Deducing existence from concept of a necessary being, that's exactly the step that the ontological argument that Kant already refuted. So in other words, even though it starts from experience, it jumps to God's existence by appealing to a concept and not from actual observation. Kant has 3 more arguments against the cosmological argument. So he says that categories like cause and substance and unity and other things only apply to things that we experience or the phenomena in terms of space and time. And these are all categories of the mind or the projector from the analogy that we mentioned previously. But God is a noumenal thing. It's a thing in itself and it's beyond experience. So therefore, using cause to talk about God is a category misuse, just like trying to measure wind with a ruler. His second objection is that the cosmological arguments treat the idea of a necessary being as if it were knowledge derived from experience. So Kant, according to him, necessity is an ideal. It's a concept and not something that you observe in the world. So therefore, the argument mistakes mental inference for empirical knowledge. His final argument is that to conclude that the necessary being exists, the cosmological argument implicitly says that because the being is necessary, it must exist. But Kant already argued that existence is not a predicate, and you cannot derive or deduce existence from a concept necessarily alone. So the cosmological argument smuggles into the ontological argument without admitting it, so it has the same flaw. So Kant argued that we cannot prove nor disprove God using reason alone, that all the classical proofs failed because they tried to move from ideas or experience to necessary existence, which is impossible according to him. So metaphysics can't give us certain knowledge of God, or things such as like the soul, for example, all metaphysical things. And the main idea is that God is beyond the limits of human theoretical reason, and we can't know God like we know the laws of physics or empirical facts. Contemporary philosopher Alvin Plantinga, he has his modal ontological argument, and he tries to bypass Immanuel Kant's objection, and his argument is as follows. So premise 1 is that it is possible that a maximally great being exists. Premise 2, if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then the maximally great being exists in some possible world. Premise 3, if a maximally great being exists in some possible worlds, then it exists in every possible world. Premise 4, if a maximally great being exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world. In conclusion, therefore, a maximally great being exists. How Plantinga escapes Immanuel Kant's objection is by redefining or reframing the concept of existence in terms of necessity and possibility rather than asserting existence as a property or predicate of being. The claim is not just that the being exists, but existence is necessary, and a necessary being is one whose existence is not contingent on anything else, so it must exist in all possible worlds. And Plantinga argues that if a maximally great being is not necessarily possible, then it must exist in every possible world because it would exist necessarily. As for the cosmological argument, what you have to try to argue is that the necessary being's existence is inferred empirically, because it only explains the existence of contingent things rather than being conceptual. So Kant said that causation can't apply beyond the phenomena, but if you can prove that it is empirical, then causation points to something logically prior without violating Kant's categories, and because the concept of necessary being is derived from experience of contingency and not pure thought. The last thing you can try to do is deny Kant's noumenal phenomenological distinction, or at least try to apply some wiggle room to it. So Kant says that God is noumena, and therefore categories like cause don't apply. So therefore, what you have to do is argue that you can infer some properties of the noumena indirectly. For example, contingency in the world suggests the ground of all being, even if we can't directly perceive it. And this doesn't mean that we know everything about God, just that existence of contingent beings gives rational warrant for a necessary being. But as for me personally, I feel like Kant's objections seem like he's just trying to muddle the waters. I understand where he's coming from, but I think he's being overtly philosophical and is trying to deny our innate disposition. Just think of it like alongside his other arguments, that you see a row of dominoes falling or contingent things existing, and within the row, you can trace the cause from one domino back to the next one. But asking what causes the first domino to fall to start this chain, you're introducing a new term outside the row, So therefore Kant says that you can't, talk about this, it can't be derived scientifically. But I just kind of disagree with him. It has to be a first cause of everything. But what do you think? Do you think Kant is right about God, that it lies beyond the existence of proof? Or do you think that the classical arguments still have weight? And just let me know in the comments below, and that brings me to the end of this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe as always.